Welcome to the Nebraska History Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Goforth. Each episode, we explore articles written and published in the Nebraska History magazine. Today, we're joined by Kylie Kinley. She's the author of the summer 2018 Nebraska History magazine article, Louise Vinciquerra, Nebraska's Bootlegger Queen. She's currently a high school English and ag education teacher in South Central Nebraska. Her written work has appeared not only in the Nebraska History magazine, but also in Nebraska Farmer, Nebraska Land magazine, and K-Starter magazine. She enjoys reading, writing, farming, and rural shenanigans. Kylie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be able to tell more people about how great Louise was.
Absolutely. And I dare to ask the question what rural shenanigans might be, but perhaps we just leave that to the imagination of everybody.
No, that's fine. I just love a good spectacle. And I think that's what attracted me to Louise. But by spectacle, I just mean like old trusty days in Clay Center was probably one of the first ones of just, guys and gals being so excited about rusty tractors and just seeing what people are passionate about, or going to a Renaissance fair or country stampede or anything that just has people that love their part of, American country, and they're going to just let that passion out for everybody to see.
Absolutely. Well, so Louise, this became a passion for you, discovering her story and writing about her in Nebraska History magazine. So first, tell us, how did you discover her story?
Yeah. So I was working as an assistant editor for the Historical Society, and I was editing an article about Judge Woodruff, who was a federal prohibition judge during that time. And Nick Batter had quoted I think it was a newspaper article about Louise's house, and it said that it oozed opulence. And those two words just stuck out to me as, who is this person? One, how would you make that much money as a woman during Prohibition to have some kind of house that would ooze opulence? Two, what does that even mean? Like, what did it look like? Did it have chandeliers? Did it have like velvet wallpaper? What are we talking about? And so I just started researching more about this person that had this oozing opulence house. And the more I got into her story, the more I just had to keep finding out about her and her husbands and ex-husbands and her children and her Olympian son. And it just was so much fun to research and write.
In that brief comment there, it really kind of hit on a lot of different aspects about Louise's life. I mean, you have marriages, you have divorces, you have an Olympic son. So she led a very, very colorful life. And as the article suggests in the title, she was regarded as a prominent figure in the bootlegging days of Prohibition in Nebraska. After you did all this research and you're reading about her and you're writing about her, what, in your opinion, made her as successful as she was?
I think that she was just a very savvy businesswoman, in which she didn't have really any formal education. She was married so young when she was, just barely a teenager. And yet she was charming and also ruthless. And I think that's I don't think they teach that at business school. I have not gone to one, but you want to be able to convince people that you're worth their money and their time. And she could do that. And then you want to deliver on your promises. And she also did that. And she was just underestimated so much by the police and by the lawyers and judges that would try her for different crimes. And she would swindle them because she took their trusting nature and then she would exploit it, which I think is admirable in some ways, and in other ways, probably not.
So during Prohibition, it's been assumed that most women were in favor of banning alcohol and had many pro-prohibition actions that were led by women. But your story kind of shows the other side of that coin, and that really wasn't the total true story. Talk about some of the roles that women played in regards to the anti-prohibition actions.
Yes. And hey, when you think about it and you think about how many people were using alcohol as self-medicating, it very much makes sense that women who couldn't own their own business or legally obtain a divorce wanted to get rid of alcohol because their husbands or partners or sons or brothers that often were addicted to alcohol or were using it as, like I said, a medicine or a painkiller there was no AA, there was no recourse if you needed to help someone in your life work through an alcohol addiction. And so the only option that they saw was, let's ban it. If they can't get it, then we can be free from abuse, from them losing all of our money, spending all of our money. And so that's what people think of. Just if you think of like women got the vote, we immediately had prohibition in this country. and a lot of it was the female vote. But what we don't also think about is women were often the makers of alcohol. If you think about like winemaking traditionally, or even whiskey or beer, because it was domestic labor and it was related to cooking, they were making that. And so suddenly there was no way to sell and to keep making that money. I mean, it's like if everyone banned chickens and you no longer could sell eggs, and we would never do that. And so they decided like, okay, well, we get why some people would want it banned, but we're also just going to keep on selling it, because also no one expected women to break the law, because they were this put on a pedestal type gender. And just like Louise found out, everyone else could be swindled appropriately. So I really think that the women that were for prohibition were just documented better. I don't really think all women were anti-beer, anti-alcohol. They were anti the abuse and the wasting of money that they saw because of alcohol's addicting factor.
That's a great clarification. Kylie Kinley is joining us. She's the author of the summer 2018 Nebraska History Magazine article, Louise Vinciquerra, Nebraska's Bootlegger Queen. And that's the subject of our show today. So let's talk a little bit about Louise. You had mentioned that at a very young age, she was already kind of seeing her life take some wild turns. She came to Omaha by way of Sicily around 1910, which would have put her about 10 years old, if I remember correctly. So talk about her early days in Omaha and what her life was like leading up to her bootlegging activities.
Yes. Okay. So she married Sebastiano when she was 13 years old.
Wow.
And then, and then she had their two sons by the age of 15. Ooh. And then when she was 22, she was in court for the first time because she had, I really think that Sebastiano started the moving of alcohol business, but Louise definitely finished it, and she was better at it than him. He was kind of, everything I've read about him, and just even from the letters that Sam wrote to the Adams County Historical Society that I used as a source, he was just a very cruel, vicious kind of man. And I mean, that's later when he tried to shoot Louise when she was asleep. And there's that great photo from the Omaha World Herald of the bullet holes in her pillow, and she's explained to the reporter what happened. Or later, he was charged with killing her second husband, Earl Haining, because he was jealous. But her life had got to have been really hard, because here she's living in Omaha. She's a mom of two as a teenager. Her husband, by her son's letter, is a vicious man. And what else would you do other than try to find something that you're good at and then excel at it, which in her case was, moving liquor and charging people for it. So I also don't know how much alcohol she actually made herself. I don't know if Louise was that good of a chemist, but she was definitely a good businesswoman. And even there's the story that I start off my article with, where they're in Lincoln, and instead of being caught with alcohol, she broke it and then and soaked it up with her skirts. And so that story is just such a very good symbol of why women were good at prohibition, because no policeman's going to stick his hand up a woman's skirt to see if the alcohol is still there. And then you could just be like, oh, I guess my skirt just smells like beer. I don't actually have any in my possession. So just savvy stuff like that, of just using the things that had made her sex weak. Like, okay, you can't run if you have a skirt on, you can't move easily, you are open to a lot of problems. And then she was like, you know what? We're going to use my skirt, and we're going to use it to hide the alcohol. And then we're going to use it to show that we're not in possession of the alcohol, because there's different nuances of what you could be charged with, because she broke it and it's just the liquid is not actually in a container. She was
very savvy, quick thinking.
Yeah.
Very quick
for
thinking.
Sure. Yes.
And it seems like for her to do what she did, I don't know if it was just, serendipity or just the right place at the right time, because you look at Omaha during the early 20th century, and in a previous podcast, we talked about Tom Denison and how Omaha was viewed as the wickedest city in the United States. And a lot of it was due in part because of that crime boss, Tom Denison. He had a lot of influence that was really focused on gambling, prostitution, and other vice activities. But it sounds like he also has some influence in the bootlegging industry. Can you talk a little bit about his role in Louise's story?
Yes. So for my research, I really think that he bankrolled a lot of her court cases and her fines, because he was using her as a distraction. She was a great distraction. She was very loud in court. She was very when she'd have reporters over to her home, she was very obnoxious to them. And so he was using her as a screen for whatever he was doing that week. And it worked really well until she decided that she didn't really want this 6 foot tall, 200-pound evil man in her business. And so she was like, I'm going to stop paying, because she paid like a monthly subscription fee. It's like Tom Dennison was Queen Louise's Netflix. And so she's like, nope, canceling my subscription. I can do this by myself. And then she started going to jail because he was protecting her with his lots of money and his goon squad. So, and this probably makes me a bad Nebraskan, but I love it when we find interesting, even maybe criminal things out about Nebraska or about Omaha, because, and my own students think this for their final project. I made my juniors write a Nebraska history paper, and just things that they found out that they were just so surprised that Nebraska is just not just corn and cows and maybe Conagra. And so I love finding out the wicked part of Omaha or the details that make Nebraska interesting, because Nebraska is so interesting. And even if our 16-year-olds don't know that, and they love anything that's, I'm trying to think of
a little seedy.
Yeah, a little seedy. They're all for it. So it was really rewarding for me as a Nebraska history nerd. Probably not. I mean, they all finished the paper, so that was good. But I think that Nebraska deserves to be part of the conversation when we talk about prohibition, when we talk about organized crime. And if we don't talk about it, nothing ever fixes or gets changed. So it's just important to acknowledge, we're not just wide open spaces. We also have crime bosses, even though that sounds a little bit not what Nebraska tourism is going to be promoting, for sure.
Well, you're right, though. History encompasses all things, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And sometimes there's an appreciation for the more, let's say, unknown and less scrupulous activities, because it just has a different shine to it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And if it gets a 16-year-old interested in writing, and because I told my students about Tom Dennison. I'm like, you guys don't even know this guy existed, and look at him, and this is the things that he did. And so one of my students actually wrote about organized crime in Nebraska, and I didn't think that kid would ever turn in an assignment, and he turned in every part of that paper. So
awesome.
If that's what it takes, then let's talk about the underworld of Nebraska.
Well, continuing on with Queen Louise, you had mentioned that she was served as a very good distraction for Dennison. She was very outspoken individual. She seemed to really love the attention. In fact, you write about how she invited the media to come to her house where she, quote unquote, retired.
Yes.
And she, that's kind of when the media started to pay some more attention to her, gave her that title, the bootlegging queen. Talk about how she used that, Dennison used it to his advantage. How did she use that attention and that ability to command presence to her advantage?
Yeah, she said that she made $45,000 since October 1921, which just feels like a obscene amount of money.
Right.
And I mean, there's no way to verify that, but the fact that she was bold enough to even tell a reporter that is fantastic. And she also just knew, she pretended she had a headache and was very dramatic. And she was just good at knowing when to lie and knowing when to be truthful. Because of course you can see her house with your own eyes if you're a reporter, and that's the house that oozed opulence. And she just knew how to play the game. And that was an example of, she immediately got arrested after that for taxes, because she said she made $45,000, and they're like, you didn't pay taxes on that.
Sure.
So that was a misstep for sure. But that was part of her charm, is that she could tell a good story and she didn't serve serious jail time from bragging about not paying income taxes, but I think that's how they got Al Capone too. That was somewhat the way that the IRS could finally get a hold of bootleggers, but she was just good at being captivating, or she was good at just saying none of your business and slamming the door in your face. She did that too. So it really just depended on what she needed to get out of the media.
You had mentioned that Tom Dennison probably, was very influential in keeping her out of jail and making sure that she didn't really serve too much in terms of punishment for her actions. But she did have a lot of run-ins with the law. When the Dennison protection, if we want to call it that, started to fade away, she still seemed to be unfazed. Like she still continued to operate despite these numerous run-ins with law enforcement. What do you think was her drive to just say, you know what? No, I'm going to do this. I don't care about you.
Yeah, I think she was making enough money and she liked being famous. I mean, she was, and I'm projecting here for sure, but I just think if you're 13 years old and you're married and you are set up with your parents to marry a guy that's cruel and ruthless and you've never really had your own identity. And then, the guy that was protecting you with his mob is not protecting you anymore. But once you've got that like taste of your identity and you are Omaha famous, and then pretty soon you're becoming Nebraska famous, you're going to do anything to keep that going. And if she truly believed that Prohibition was anti-American, and like many people did, and it's like, you can't tell me what I can drink and when I can drink it, then it makes a lot of sense of this, you can't tell me what to do. And when she finally, the other part of why she kept doing it is because one of the Prohibition agents fell in love with her, and Earl Hayning loved Louise. Like he just would bring her sugar that he confiscated from her competitors. He took care of her children, which I think is wild because, Sebastiano never took care of his own children, but Earl was there. He made sure, like there's one newspaper article where Earl led her sons away so that they didn't have to see their mom get arrested. And so if you finally have a partner like Earl, even though he's supposed to be prosecuting you, of course you're going to keep doing it because you like the attention, you like the money, and you found someone that's treating you way better than your husband does. And it's all working out. And maybe it's a little bit of a serendipitous, but I don't blame Earl Hayning for falling in love with her, even though it ruined his career and his first marriage. But I think it was all going really right for her for probably 5 to 6 years.
All right. So you alluded to this story earlier about the gunshots into the pillow. So Louise was married twice, and the
two important ones.
The two important ones. Yeah. Very good point. Talk about those two marriages and that subsequent violence between these two men, because that was a really a strong point in your article about her story and what she was doing in Omaha. Yes.
I'm assuming Earl met her as part of a raid, and he wasn't really good at his job after he met her. He had gotten like an acclamation even from the head of the Prohibition task force. And then they were just like, no way would Earl Hayning turn dirty for a woman. Oh, he totally did. And so, then she asked Sebastiano for divorce, and he responded by coming over to her house when she was asleep and unloading a revolver into her bedroom. And I don't understand how she didn't get hurt at all. It's not like the weapons were that accurate or that Sebastiano is known for being a good shot, but goodness, it's one of the most chilling photos of when I was researching of her sitting on the bed, and you can tell her she's in the mid-sentence for a reporter, and you can see the bullet holes and the singed feathers coming out of the pillow. And if that had happened to me, again, I'm probably relating to her too much, but I would not go back to that bedroom for a long time. And it's like the next day, and she's there like nonchalant talking about these bullets that nearly got her head. So she is just courageous. And eventually she got the divorce from Sebastiano. She married Earl. She ended up filing for divorce from Earl later. And I really don't know why that was. I think she just wanted to be her own person. And I never found anything that divorce had actually ever been finalized. And Earl was actually drinking beer in her basement after Prohibition had ended. And Sebastiano and some of his friends had heard about it. And Sebastiano, he was acquitted, but I think that Sebastiano shot Earl through the basement window. So Sebastiano's thing was shooting people when they were asleep and or drinking beer through windows. And it just lines up with what he did to Louise. But he also did not actually get punished for that. But Earl was really an interesting person, and I think that that's how Louise stopped being just Omaha's bootlegger queen, but moved out into the Sandhills, into Hastings, into other parts of Nebraska to really have a statewide empire, because Earl had the connections from his days on the other side of the law.
And Earl did not, he died shortly after that shooting incident, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Yes. And he is buried in Lincoln, not with Louise. He's in Wyuka, I think.
Well, speaking of death,
Yes.
I would love to be able to talk more about Queen Louise, but we're going to leave it up to the listeners to find the article on our website, history.nebraska.gov, to really get into the nuts and bolts, because it is a fascinating story. But she led such an active life, and her death, it almost seemed anticlimactic in a sense. Talk about the circumstances surrounding her death, because as you mentioned, she moved away, so it didn't even occur in Nebraska.
No, she moved to Arizona, and she was running a roadhouse, and a guy came in and said he wanted to talk to her about a car that he had for sale, and she left with him. And Louise had always been such a savvy, intuitive person, especially when it came to, the selling and buying of merchandise, whether it was alcohol or a house or anything else. And she left with this guy that she barely knew, and he robbed her and killed her in the desert. And they didn't even find her body for several months. And when they did, it was she was a missing person. And this person that had been such a huge part of Nebraska's art scene. I mean, she was really talented. She donated several items to the Hastings Museum when she lived in Hastings. She wasn't just a criminal. I don't think any criminal is just a criminal. Everybody's so much bigger than crimes that they commit or mistakes that they made. But it was a really tragic end for this person that had been loved and had loved a lot of people. And because of a mistake that she made by trusting this guy. And I don't know, she didn't even have that much money at that point, right? She was not famous anymore. And he just robbed her for the contents of her purse and shot her. And so I don't know if there was bigger organized crime behind that. I never found any kind of a reason for why it had to happen that way, or what motivated the guy that killed her. And so it was a very tragic end for someone that had lived a really rich and full life. And
she wasn't that old. Was she in her late 40s?
Yeah, she was 48. So
wow.
it was a lot of life to pack into 48 years.
And again, it's just, so much happening. And, we really didn't even get a chance to talk much about her sons, one being an Olympic boxer, which imagine that story being told during the matches. My mom she lives in Omaha and this is what she does.
Yeah, no, it was great. Or we didn't talk about how her cousin was entangled in a shootout, and Louise definitely helped her with, it was, a good case of ladies helping ladies, but not in the way that we usually think of it. But she was a fiercely loyal person to her family, to her sons, to her husbands, as long as they were not doing terrible things to her, like, trying to kill her in her sleep. But she's a fascinating Nebraskan, and I always enjoy talking about her story.
Well, Kylie, as we wrap up our conversation about Queen Louise, share with us what you enjoyed most about researching and writing about her life and sharing her story.
Yeah, I just really appreciated, because I was a journalism major in college, and I just really appreciated thinking about if I was the reporter that was interviewing her, or the fact that they, sometimes just made her as this villain, and other times she was a hero, like the underdog. And I mean, she even had this wooden roller coaster built in her backyard for her sons, the neighborhood kids. So she did bad things. I'm not going to pretend that she didn't, but she also just had such this, and maybe that's because she was married so young and had children so young. She was just so playful and whimsical about a lot of things. And just finding out about this person that I had never heard of before. And I'm not saying she needs a bust at the Nebraska State Capitol either. It'd be very cool. I don't know if she deserves to be on the same plane as Standing Bear and Willa Cather, who are also two of my favorite Nebraskans. But she lived largely. And I just think that those stories are the ones that deserve to be told. And she hadn't, no one had really talked about her before. So that was my favorite part, was just finding a notable Nebraskan that hadn't had the chance to have a story told about her.
Well, the story is great, and you can find the article on our website, history.nebraska.gov. We'll also have a link to the story in the description of this podcast as well, so wherever you might be listening, you'll be able to link to it there and give it a good read. But Kylie, I do want to thank you again for your time. Thanks for your time for researching and writing about Queen Louise, and thank you for your time today to share a little bit of her story with us here.
Of course. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you for listening to the Nebraska History Podcast. To learn more about Nebraska History Magazine, to listen to more podcasts, or to support our podcast by becoming a member of History Nebraska, go to history.nebraska.gov/podcast. Until next time, for History Nebraska, I'm Chris Goforth.